I have to start from my literal foundation in order to make any progress. Most people don't realize how messed up their feet are because we're so used to just putting socks and shoes on and going about our day. Turns out you start addressing your foot function and now the knee pain is gone. My hips, I got more mobile hips. I feel better at 60 than I did at 40.
They're coming to you, but they're not expecting you to do something to them to make them feel better. They're expecting you to coach them through the process of helping themselves feel better.
Exactly.
It's almost like a virus, like it's a cultural virus that is causing this like an epidemic of foot dysfunction.
Time and time again, my clients are people that have gone those routes and those routes have failed them. It's not the feet in isolation, it's the full body function. That's a really big piece that most people totally miss.
Welcome back to the Restore to Explore podcast with your soulmates from the Foot Collective. Here at TFC, we're on a mission to help humans restore their natural health and function from the ground up, so that we can all explore movement and life with more freedom and confidence. And in this week's episode, our head of training, Jim Dooner, sits down with barefoot coach and movement educator Heidi van Mastrigt, one of our TFC guides, for a deep dive into the evolving world of pain management and movement training. Together they explore why shifting from symptom-based treatment to a more functional whole-body approach is so important, especially when it comes to foot health. Heidi shares her personal journey with footwear and how it's shaped the way she supports clients in making better choices, including a strong case for minimalist shoes. You'll also hear about the role of thorough assessments, the cultural shift needed in athletic communities, and how simple tools can make movement training more effective and accessible for everyone. This one's packed with insight on how we can better educate, equip, and empower people to move well from the ground up. And actually coincides with us Aussie TFC crew members catching up with Heidi and a whole heap of other TFC guides and barefoot advocates from around the world this week in Denver for the Barefoot Shoe Expo hosted by Anya. So while you're listening, we'll all be hanging out and we can't wait to bring you updates from an amazing event when we're back in Oz. Let's get into it. And before we go, we did want to let you in on one last little secret too. Do you want to know one of the most powerful things that you can do for your foot health today? It's changing your shoes. We are probably preaching to the converted. A lot of our listeners are probably well aware of the benefits of natural footwear, but we want to reiterate that most modern shoes are too narrow, too stiff, and too cushioned, which means they don't let your feet move the way they're designed to. That's why we're super proud to be partnering with Vivo Barefoot, one of the leaders in natural footwear globally. Vivo Barefoot makes footwear that's foot-shaped, flat, flexible, and thin enough for your feet to feel the ground beneath them. And here at TFC, we believe that's exactly what your feet need to function naturally. We've personally been wearing them for years and we've seen firsthand how powerful this transition can be for improving our own foot strength, posture, and performance. And we're really keen for you guys to try them out too. So depending on where you're starting from, of course, this transition does need to be slow and steady. We are here to support you with the training and education that you need through that journey. But if you are ready to make the switch to shoes that support the health of your feet, instead of disrupting them, then you can head to the link in the description of this episode to explore Vivo's awesome range. Don't think Vivos are for you? Well, you can check out our footwear finder where there's a heap of other trusted natural footwear brands from around the world with special discounts too. So all of those links are in the show notes.
All right, Heidi. So great to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, awesome to be here.
We connected originally in San Francisco at the Wildlings event, and I got you, balancing on Soulmate, playing hacky sack. I think it might have been, definitely was the first time you played hacky sack. Don't know about the Soulmate, but it was a really cool way to meet through, play. And I think we've been following each other on Instagram a little bit, but we hadn't really sort of exchanged much. So it's always cool meeting someone for the first time the old-fashioned way in person.
Yeah. And that was my first time on a Soulmate. Now that you say that,
cool.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And I'm super keen to, just obviously we've had a bunch of chats since then. We connected again in Berkeley for our TFC guide certification. and we've had plenty of chats, I guess, in those short times that we've been together. But I'm super keen to dive into your story with feet, because I know I've heard it. I think I could probably hear it again and go a bit deeper. But I think it's a really fascinating journey that you've had, and obviously has led you to where you are now. So yeah, why don't we just start with that, your story with feet, and how you came to do what you do now, as on Instagram as that barefoot coach, but obviously working a lot with feet as a trainer.
Yeah. Well, in terms of what got me here, it really goes back to when I broke my foot. I broke my fifth metatarsal on my left foot when I was dancing. So I was a competitive dancer growing up from the age of like 8 or 9 to 20, 21. And so I broke that foot, and, I was 18 at the time, didn't really know anything, was put in a cast to boot. One session of physical therapy was sent on my way, and that was it. I was cleared to go full force back into dance and everything. And fast forward, I started competing in powerlifting in like 2014, and powerlifting exposed all of the compensations in my body, obviously, because I'm under really heavy weight, 4 or 5 times a week, squatting, benching, deadlifting. And so I ended up with chronic pain in my right hip and my right neck and shoulder. And it was just like clockwork. Every 8 weeks or so, I would get some kind of like minor tweak or injury. It would put me out for a couple of days, and then I would get back into it. And it got to the point where it was really interfering with my progress in terms of strength. Obviously, that's a problem in powerlifting. And so I competed for a few years. I trained in with like a powerlifting style for probably 5 or 6 years, competed for maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 of those. And then eventually I was just tired of always being in pain. And I was tired of not being able to progress. And, along that journey, I went to all these different professionals, chiropractors, massage therapists, corrective exercise folks, myofascial release people. I tried everything because I was like, well, I'm going to get past this, right? Like, I'm not the kind of person to just kind of accept like being injured or being in pain. Like, I wanted to get to the bottom of it. And all of those attempts, I learned something great. All those professionals were awesome, but it was never a long-term solution. It would always come back. And eventually I knew in the back of my head that that broken foot, like most foot injuries, it was just never the same, right? Like you get some kind of foot injury, even a stubbed toe, and it's like it's never the same. And I hear that over and over and over again with clients and just, people out in the wild. And so I had realized at one point that when I was squatting, my feet looked really different. And so I started to dive a little bit deeper into my the way like my feet were positioned and just like my foot function in general. And I came to find out that my feet were highly dysfunctional and deformed from all the years that I was dancing. I didn't even realize, I feel like most people don't realize how messed up their feet are because we're so used to just putting socks and shoes on and going about our day, right?
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, exactly. And so I started, I don't remember what year it was, probably 2021 is when I like full on committed. And I said, I'm getting rid of all of my conventional shoes. Anything with a tapered toe box, I'm throwing away. I got the toe spacers. I started, doing all the work with my toes and my feet and whatnot. And realized that the progress, like the carryover from working on my feet to my progress in the gym was huge. Like the pain, right? Like I wasn't in as much pain. I was slowly making more progress in terms of strength, and even my physique was changing. And so I started to just go deeper and deeper. I started doing a ton more research in terms of reading books about foot function and fascial lines, and because it's never been just about the feet, right? Like my background is fitness, is training, right? And it has turned into like functional strength training, functional conditioning type of training. But it was my feet that got in the way of progressing with all of that. And so it was like, well, I have to start from my literal foundation in order to make any progress in what I love to do. And that turned into being able to help others with very similar issues. And so I started implementing what I was learning into my own practice with clients. And turns out you start addressing your foot function and, oh, now the knee pain is gone. Oh, my hips, I got more mobile hips. I feel better at 60 than I did at 40, right? And so it just kind of organically became what I do, is fitness, body work, movement from a foot focused perspective. So that's kind of what got me here. I think I answered your question.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and there's a lot in that, and there's always, you know, different rabbit holes you could go down. But something that I would like to emphasize there is that, first of all, your own journey and your own experience as a practitioner, especially as a health and movement professional, or someone who's helping someone or people with their health or their movement, then your own journey often plays the biggest role in your ability to help others, because you do go down your own rabbit holes of research. You have to I feel you have to actually overcome some of your own obstacles in order to truly believe that it's possible, to have that belief that it is possible, so that you can then pass that on to other people, because a lot of people don't have that innately, or that's being trained out of them, unfortunately, by health practitioners, that they can't change, especially when it comes to the feet for some reason. And another thing that I took from that is, while you're a trainer, you're coming to it from a perspective of fitness and, you know, movement health. You're not necessarily having to diagnose and treat conditions. You're actually just working with people with their movement and their fitness, and to help them create the best outcome, then you actually do have to address these restrictions, especially in their foundation, like for movement, as we've talked about. And that often has these carryover effects where, oh yeah, my knee doesn't hurt anymore, or my foot, if they did have foot issues, the foot hurts less, my knee's better, my back's better. It's a very common story that we hear from people who start looking at the body in this integrated way. But it's not that you've come in as a you know, necessarily a health professional that is trying to diagnose and treat something. It's just, let's improve your function.
Yeah.
Oh, and wow, we improved your function, and now your pain is a lot better, without necessarily having to do all these weird interventions to sort of treat the symptoms of the issue. And I think trainers are in actually a really unique, or quite unique position, where people aren't coming to you for their pain. They're coming to you to improve their movement and their fitness. And at the same time, they're like, oh yeah, I've got this niggle in my knee, I've got back pain, I've got, you know, etc. But they're not expecting you to fix that pain. So they can kind of open up to this longer term movement based approach, which then fixes their pain. Well, often will resolve a lot of their issues without having to focus on the issues necessarily themselves. So I think that's a really cool part of it.
Yeah. And, you know, I've been a certified trainer for 12 or 13 years at this point. And one of the first specializations that I did was corrective exercise, because I've always been obsessed with the human body, with movement. I mean, I was a dancer. And even beyond that, like, I loved learning about anatomy and physiology. I took a lot of, you know, advanced science classes in college and even high school and whatnot. And it's always been about movement. It's always been about optimizing movement, even though like when people think fitness trainer, it's like, oh, like I just get people in shape, but it's actually so much more than that, you know? And it always has been for me. Like it's never been about, oh, I'm going to help you lose 30 pounds. It's always been like, oh, well, I'm going to teach you how to do a squat properly. And and like that has kind of evolved into now where I'm at is more about like, oh, I'm going to I'm usually getting people that have some kind of foot problem, right? Plantar fasciitis, bunions, whatever it may be. So we're addressing their feet, but then even beyond that, it goes further into like, well, can you move as a human being, right? Like, how is your natural movement? And so, yeah, it has evolved into that. And ironically, most of my clients do come to me because they're in pain and then kind of expect, you know, you're going to help me solve this. I know you can help me solve this because I hear what you say. I've seen what you've done. And, and so I have come to a place where my clientele actually is that person. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Coaching has evolved to the point that people are actually coming to you because they believe that you can improve their pain. And it's probably also on the back of a lot of failed, I guess, attempts by people who are just trying to treat symptoms, and people are really open. I think the key difference there is that they're coming to you sort of for their pain because they want a different approach that is more long-term, more function-based and less symptom-based, because they've tried all these symptom-based interventions and have realized, they're not actually doing anything to improve my health or my movement. They're just covering up the symptoms of the dysfunction that I have. And so that way, they're much more, they're coming to you, but they're not expecting you to do something to them to make them feel better. They're expecting you to coach them through the process of helping themselves feel better.
Exactly. Yeah. And, it's interesting because I have gotten hung up myself of like not being a podiatrist or not having that like formal education, not being a doctor of physical therapy. But time and time again, my clients are people that have gone those routes and those routes have failed them and they just haven't made the progress that they wanted. I mean, I have a client right now who was in physical therapy for over a year for plantar fasciitis. And she had asked them, like, is my foot ever going to feel as good as it did before? And the physical therapist said no. And so she had found me on Instagram and, we had a conversation, and hearing these stories of people that have gone these other routes. Granted, there are great PTs, there are great podiatrists. We all know this, right? It's not everybody. But there is this common theme of like they're not getting to the root. They're not taking that functional approach. It's more of like, I'm going to check the boxes of like, this is how we treat plantar fasciitis. This is how we treat Achilles tendon, right? And so one of a step in my process of working with me is really in-depth assessments. And I will always ask after they go through the written assessment, the photos, the videos, all of what they have to do, we'll meet again. And I'll always ask them, what did you learn from this process? And this client in particular was like, well, I've been with my physical therapist for over a year, and they have not asked me to do a half of the moves in your assessment. And it always kind of blows my mind because from my perspective and just from my work, the feet are so integral to whole body movement. And so to have never asked somebody with foot issues to squat or lunge or hinge, I mean, those are all very basic movements that the feet support, right? And so to understand how the feet function in natural human movement is key to understanding, okay, well, here are these compensations in the feet, and this is what we need to work on in order to get you to the point that one, yes, your feet are feeling better because they're functioning better, but also that your feet are supporting your everyday movement, right?
Yeah, and it is kind of baffling that more holistic whole body approach does get missed, and it is a symptom, I suppose, of the specialist culture that we have, where you focus. If you're a podiatrist, you focus on the feet pretty much, and what are the things going on in the feet that you can change to help with someone's pain, and that's the way people are trained, and that is seen all throughout the, I guess, traditional healthcare or disease care culture, where it's like an endocrinologist focuses on endocrinology and cardiovascular and so on and so forth. And obviously there is an awareness that the body works as a system, but in practice, the assessments and interventions that you see tend to just focus on the one system or the one area. And that obviously has its drawbacks. I think it has its benefits in certain cases. But for someone to know really deeply about one system, but I think it doesn't make sense to only treat in that way or only to assess in that way, and to miss this sort of full picture. Because if you work on someone's foot function and you just improve their foot strength, mobility, coordination, that's probably going to be good for them. And these days in you're kind of lucky if you do get that from a podiatrist or that might sound a little bit like I'm having a go, but it's just the way of the way of the industry at the moment. You are lucky if you get really good, solid rehab, and it's not just podiatry, it could be chiro, physio, etc. I'm not trying to have a go at podiatry specifically, but just the way that healthcare is traditionally done, you're quite lucky if you get a really good, active, progressive rehab program. Even then, if you just focus on that one area, you're very likely missing other driving factors, say up at the hips or the trunk, that are contributing to that dysfunction at the foot. Or you might be missing the fact that the footwear the person's in is actually driving this dysfunction, even if you're trying to work on that dysfunction outside of that. It's like trying to work on someone's toe splay. Again, you're lucky if people work on your toe splay, but then putting them straight back into shoes that are narrowing the toes. So we do really need this more bird's eye perspective. And I think this is where, rather than saying, oh, these people are not good, don't see them. It's more about going, well, yes, that has a role and it should be integrated with what I do. And I think this is really what Foot Collective is trying to do, is find the people who are working to treat and manage symptoms, because that there is a place for that, and then connect them with the people who are improving function or really having this long-term functional approach, and not allow people to get into this cycle of just symptom management where all they're doing is managing symptoms and not addressing the deeper root causes either in the area or in throughout the rest of the body. So I'm kind of interested too. There's a couple of paths I want to go down, but while it's fresh in mind, you mentioned your process for working with someone. Is that something that you can sort of outline? Obviously, you don't have to go into all the details, but I'd be interested to hear, and I'm sure everyone listening would be interested to hear what that process looks like at a high level.
Yeah. So, when it comes to working with me, I mean, I work with a variety of people, whether they're athletes or whether, they're not, general population. And typically I have people come to me because of foot problems. It's just the nature of, my message online and whatnot. But with that, there's always an assessment involved, and it always starts at the feet. And so, like I said, my assessment process is very thorough. And coming from a fitness background, functional movement background, I'm having people, regardless of what symptoms they're having, going through a series of movements from the feet up. And so we're looking at, I call it local foot posture and function and global foot posture and function. And that essentially means that we're going to take a look at your toe dexterity, right? Do you have control of the big toe? Can you move it independently? And then into ankle mobility, what does your dorsiflexion look like? Do you have the ability to control pronation, supination on command? And then it goes even further, right? Well, how are you squatting? What does your hip mobility look like? How is your foot to hip connection? And that's a really big piece that most people totally miss, is the foot to hip connection. And from there, right now, given that I moved not too long ago, all of my work has been online. So I'm working with people virtually. And after that very tedious, intense assessment process is done, I then will write a program and meet with them on a regular basis to make sure that they're supported, that they feel like they're getting the right guidance to address their issues. Usually I'm working with people for, as little as 3 months, but I've got clients that I've worked with for years still. So, and it really does evolve from like, okay, you came to me because you have a foot issue, because you have plantar fasciitis, for example. But we're 6 months in, and now what we're working on is your thoracic mobility. Your feet, you've addressed your feet. We're still working on it. Right. It's not, there's no such thing as like 8 weeks to straight toes. Like it doesn't exist. Right. And that's something I can tell all of my clients, even my prospective clients, like, this is a commitment. There's no such thing as quick fixes. And so I think because I frame it from that perspective, I do get a lot of people that understand that this is a process, this is a commitment, a long-term commitment. And it's great because oftentimes the result of all that is I have somebody who came to me for plantar fasciitis, but 9 months down the line, they're 10, 20 pounds down. They're walking more than they ever have. Their mobility is better. Now they're eating healthier. So it's cool how it has evolved into that. But anyway, yeah. So that's kind of what that process looks like. And eventually I'll work to building some in-person clients here in Orange County.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it just brings up to me that same point of people committing to that long-term process, which I think is just not really emphasized enough in healthcare. It is very, what is the intervention that's going to help my pain with this? And then there's not really this commitment to a long-term process. And I think the difference here as well, obviously you mentioned the client that that had been getting PT for a year and they still have plantar fasciitis, they're now coming to you. And it's like, there's a difference between still having the issue after a year versus resolving this symptoms of that issue with a function-based approach and then continuing to improve your function in other areas, because this sort of unfortunate reality of our modern lifestyle and culture is that dysfunctions will accumulate simply because of our lack of movement, our lack of exposure to movement, quantity, quality, variability, because our entire environment, modern environment, is set up for sedentarism and physical inactivity. And so if we just don't get the natural movements that our body expects, then we end up with restrictions. And that happens over decades. Like obviously it starts as kids, especially when kids are sort of put in these stiff, rigid heeled shoes from the age of 2. But then they go into chairs every day from the age of 5. And then it just, goes from there. So it's decades of built up, whether you call it dysfunction or just accumulated physical inactivity. And so there pretty much always will be something to work on. And, there's no sort of perfect, but there's going to be restrictions and things that you can improve. And even if there's not restrictions, then there'll be something that you could improve from an athletic performance point of view or a sports specific point of view. So it is like an infinite journey, but it's very rewarding if you're not just trying to treat symptoms the whole time. You're not just like, oh, I'm in pain and I'm on this journey of like trying to resolve this one issue for years. It's more like, oh, I've resolved that. Now I'm going on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and just generally taking your whole function with you, like improving your function along the way, which also just affects all other aspects of quality of life. Like you said, you're now walking a lot more. Your body composition is better. Your mental health is better. There's all these carryover effects that come from that process. So really love all of that, and we sort of touched on footwear within those conversations, and you've got quite an interesting story with footwear. I'll let you tell it. But yeah, tell me the story with your journey with footwear, and then how you approach footwear with your clients.
Yeah. Well, just like anybody, I grew up wearing conventional shoes, and my shoes of choice growing up were Converse, Vans, just kind of like the classic canvas sneakers, and also factoring in the fact that I was a competitive dancer. So from the age of 8 or 9, I was wearing very tight taper toe shoes, specifically tap shoes. It was really the tap shoes that probably did the most, work on my feet. And so all those things combined, and by the time I was like a teenager, I had bunions. I didn't even know, right? I had no idea, but I had bunions by the time I was a teenager, hair on my toes. And then even into powerlifting, I mean, I competed in powerlifting in chucks. That's what you did, right? Even today, you go into the gym and people that are, usually in squat rack or lifting heavy using barbell, they're in chucks, they're in Vans. And as I got rid of all of those shoes, let me rewind a little bit. I knew about natural footwear, minimal barefoot shoes, from when Vibram Five Fingers first came out in the early 2010s, or whenever that was. Ironically, I worked at a comfort shoe store as my first job, where I had to learn about all of the quote unquote comfort shoes. I had to learn how to prescribe certain insoles, certain arch support insoles. At the time, right now it's really high tech if you go into one of the stores, but at the time it was just kind of like a pressure sensor you would stand on, and the red areas had the most pressure, and then, gradually get to like blue. And so based on that, I had to say, oh, you need a metatarsal pad. Oh, you need a heel counter, right? And it's all very just full circle and so serendipitous, in my opinion, given where I'm at now. Because I was like 17 at the time that I was doing all of this. And so, I was one of those people that was like, we need to bring the ground up to your arch, and that's why you need this arch support insole. Like, I was that person. Okay. And so it's always funny to me when I hear those arguments, because I'm like, I know where you're going with this, and it's really flawed. But anyway, so I had known, and I loved my Five Fingers, even back in 2011, 2012, whenever I had first gotten them. And I wore them to the gym. I did all the things. But eventually, I was still young. I still kind of cared, like, what I looked like. And, like, it's no secret that, like, Vibram Five Fingers is always labeled as the ugly barefoot shoe, right? My opinions differ now, but that's beside the point. Yeah, so then I eventually got rid of all my shoes, and just the transition from wearing a tapered toe box to having a foot shaped shoe, whether it's the Five Fingers or some other brand, really played a big role in my foot transformation, as it does with most people, right? Like, your feet, your toes just need the space to splay. And so when it comes to how I recommend, or how I work with clients and recommend footwear, one, it always depends on the person. And, I get people in my DMs all the time that are like, which shoes are the best? And it's like, I mean, you're going to have to go through my whole assessment process. I need background info. Like, I'm going to come back with more questions and answers for you if you ask me that, because footwear, like, I almost think of it as like a medication in a sense, right? Like, especially if you're dealing with some kind of issue. It's different if you don't really have pain or you're not dealing with an injury, but like the people that have pain or are dealing with injuries are usually the ones asking. And so oftentimes, you know, although I say shoes shouldn't have toe springs, shoes shouldn't have a heel toe drop, I always try to preface that by saying for healthy, strong feet, right? Because the reality is there are some people that do need a toe spring because they're having major big toe dysfunction. And there is a time and place for those things. So when I'm working with clients, obviously the goal is to get to as minimal of a shoe as we can and as they want. Now, the one non-negotiable is that it has to be foot shaped. There's no way around the foot shaped shoe. It has to be foot shaped, especially. And you know, I explain this to my clients all the time, and 100% they're always on board, which is awesome. But I think it's because they're dealing with the consequences. They can feel it, right? Most people are not going to take action until they're experiencing some kind of pain, right? Some kind of discomfort. And so by the time they get to me, they've dealt with the discomfort and pain. They've typically tried other avenues, and they're at the point where they're like, I will literally do anything, right? And so they're always on board with the foot shaped shoes. And luckily, we're so what's the word I'm looking for? We're so lucky that we have the options we do today, right? Because if you think back, you know, even just 10 years ago, it was like, you want a foot-shaped shoe that looks like a classic canvas sneaker? Like, it's not happening, you know? And so, anyway, I think that we're so lucky in today's world in 2024 that we can say, you know, I have my clients send me pictures of their shoes, and then I will go and do the research. Oftentimes, I already know a brand that is like comparable in style, and I can just say, hey, here's a link. There you go. There's the shoes that look like the ones that you already have, but fit the criteria of a healthy shoe, right? That's going to allow your foot to function as it should. So,
yeah, you're right. The times have changed, and the amount of barefoot or natural footwear options is like just exploded recently. I feel like there's another brand that comes out every week, which is really amazing because we need more and more. We're still the natural footwear market share, I suppose, is still a tiny fraction. Like if you go out and look at everyone on the street, no one is wearing it really. Like you're very lucky if you see someone wearing it. But you do, maybe, you know, one person here and there, but there's still a long way to go. But the other, you know, you mentioned how you can get any style in this sort of natural footwear with the natural footwear characteristics, but you can also find foot-shaped shoes that also have other characteristics of more conventional shoes that people are sort of currently dependent on because their feet aren't functioning the way they need to. So you've got your brands like Ultra and Topo, and I think there's some others, Bahe, that have, you know, potentially a bit more cushioning, sometimes a bit more toe spring, even a bit of a heel lift, because some people are frankly dependent on that heel lift until they improve their foot and ankle function. But they are still foot shaped. And I know that we've had plenty of discussions about foot shaped being a non-negotiable. It's at the top of our list of the 5 Fs of natural footwear. And it is honestly baffling how many people come in to classes or foot health consults with us, and they've been given a shoe by a podiatrist that isn't foot shaped, and they've got a 4-foot issue, they've got bunions, they've got mons neuroma, they've got anything going on really, and there is not a single person who doesn't automatically intuitively go, oh yeah, I shouldn't be squishing my toes together. Like as soon as you point it out, they go, oh yeah, makes sense, I'm on board, I want this foot shape thing. The other thing that they do is then they try on the shoe and then they go, oh, it kind of looks a bit funny, doesn't it? And a bit like a clown shoe or whatever. It's like, wow, there's so much space, and it feels a bit weird because on my toes because there's so much space. So that in itself is this interesting cultural meme, I suppose you'd call it, where we have been trained from a young age to think that shoes should be narrow, even not consciously, like, oh yeah, logically you know that they shouldn't once it's been pointed out, but subconsciously it's been built into us that shoes are narrow at the forefoot,
Yeah.
and narrow at the toes, and it's almost like a virus, like it's a cultural virus that is causing this like an epidemic of foot dysfunction, or is a major part of the epidemic, a major contributing factor for this epidemic of foot dysfunction. And it is just this cultural virus that shoes should be narrow. And it literally makes no sense. And I believe the main reason that exists is because it's easier to create shoe lasts that way. It's more cost effective, basically, to create lasts that are more symmetrical.
Right.
And it's more expensive to create shoe lasts that have a straight big toe and are widest at the toes. So it is funny that everyone intuitively understands it, and yet that there are still health professionals recommending shoes that aren't foot shaped, even in the case of literal forefoot conditions that are a result of compression of the forefoot.
Right. Yeah, it really doesn't. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. How do you think we shift? Obviously, it's starting to shift. How do you think we shift that culture of footwear? What are some different avenues that we can explore?
Yeah. I mean, I think that bringing awareness to foot function, and especially the big toe. I mean, I obviously have worked more so with athletes, or at least active folks, who on a fundamental level value function, right? They value their bodily autonomy and their independence, and they want to keep doing whatever it is, right? Whether they're just a weekend warrior and they do, they go for runs every other day, or if they play professional, semi-professional sports. And I think bringing the education of what a foot should be able to do is how we then shift the footwear. Because especially with athletes, to bring the education of, hey, if you want to be able to explode, to move laterally, to jump, to run fast, to do all of these things, and you want to do it for a long time, and you want that longevity in your career, or whatever, play, recreation, whatever it may be, you have to have a well-functioning big toe. In the same way that like they know, oh, I have to be mobile and strong to some degree to perform my activity or sport. Well, your feet are included in that conversation, right? And just because we have the technology of all these different shoes that have all these different features doesn't mean that we can just shove the feet in shoes and call it a day and then expect, no injuries or no pain. Which, this is a little bit of a tangent, but we're seeing more injuries today than ever before. But athletes are stronger, bigger, faster, more explosive. And it's like, well, why is that? But like, they're stronger, bigger, faster, and more explosive from the knees up. And like from the knees down, they are 3 times weaker, because modern society, shoes, even just the approach to training in sports and fitness, So I think like bringing it to that functional piece, which of course I think that, right? Because that's what I'm all about, is how we start to shift in footwear. Because then it's like, oh, well, it only makes sense that I'm wearing shoes that allow my foot to function as it is naturally meant to, because then my likelihood, right, if we look over a long, many years, long period of time, my likelihood of being injured is lower. My likelihood of improving my performance is higher. So, yeah, bringing it back to
And the athletes, especially if you start getting some elite or high profile athletes really caring about it and wearing shit, which is starting to happen now, which is awesome to see. Still, again, it's a tiny fraction of, the elite athletes that are out there, but eventually they will have to adopt this. If other athletes are starting to do it and they're getting some kind of benefit, whether it's performance-wise or injury prevention-wise, sure, it'd be handy to have research on it. But as soon as athletes start to train on the cutting edge and incorporate things like this, then other athletes tend to follow suit. And especially if, in those high-profile circles, then the athletes below that, or who look up to those people, will start going, oh, I should care about that too. Or maybe I'll think about wearing the shoes that they're wearing. And we caught up with a Premier League player when we were in the UK recently, and he's had issues with his toes, and he started wearing Vibram 5 fingers, which actually makes his feet feel a lot better. And he can run in Vibram 5 fingers, and he's been on the journey, improving his foot function, and he's now getting a lot of his teammates in Vibram 5 fingers. And we just had this vision of, oh wow, imagine you get some really high profile athletes wearing those, and then suddenly Vibram 5 fingers are cool, and they're not the super barefoot.
That's my dream.
And it's like, it becomes almost an ironic hip thing to do, is to wear the 5 fingers. It's then the only issue with that though is that if people only see the athlete wearing the shoe and they're like, oh, I want to wear that shoe, and they're like, oh, then that made my foot hurt. It would be the same.
Yeah.
It'd be the same cycle that we went through originally with Vibram, where everyone just didn't transition properly, and they didn't realize what work went on behind the scenes with these athletes to facilitate them being in these shoes. So I think you're right. We need the education piece around function, but we also do need some key players, so to speak, who are helping spread it to the masses, I suppose, but spread it to the masses with that context of education, because otherwise, the reality is people will get injured if they try and do too much too soon when it comes to transitioning with their footwear. And that is why there is such a bias in traditional healthcare settings against barefoot shoes, is because people often come to that traditional model going, oh, I tried barefoot shoes and now I hurt. And so the perspective of those people who are seeing those people who got hurt in barefoot shoes go, oh, well, barefoot shoes mustn't be good.
Right.
Just stick to your supportive cushion shoes.
Yeah.
Just because the context isn't there.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because now that I'm thinking about it, at the gym that I was previously at prior to moving, I would often walk around and you would see more minimalist shoes in that gym, in that commercial gym, than any other commercial gym. And it's because I brought the education. I had a whiteboard and I would put a new fun fact or message or just thought-provoking statement, usually about feet. I would have a new one every week, every month. And slowly, you start walking around and like, oh, okay, you're listening. You saw my message, and and even the people I worked with. And it was because I brought the education along with it, right? I wasn't just going and preaching minimalist shoes are the best. You need them for your training and everything you do. It was like, no, we need to get the foot functioning in an optimal way. We need stronger feet, and the gym is usually one of the best places to incorporate minimalist shoes because you're already moving, right, in ways you don't normally move throughout the day, but also not doing a lot of high impact things, at least, everyday people. Most people are not going into the gym and doing plyometrics, right? So it's one of the best places that you can implement minimalist shoes. But it does come back to the education. The education has to be there in order to do it effectively.
And there's also a level of courage that you have to be different and to be the person who is wearing the clown shoes and to, feel like people are looking at your weird shoes. And I think some people have that more than others naturally. But if you are educated and you really understand what's going on with a foot-shaped shoe versus a narrow shoe, or a heel versus not, or cushion versus not, as it pertains to strength training or whatever, then if you're really solid in that education and that understanding and that belief, then you can navigate that discomfort of feeling like the weird one a bit easier, because if someone asked you, and you're like, oh yeah, well, you kind of want to tell people about it. So it is a different thing than just sort of being told you should wear these shoes and you don't know why, or even thinking a shoe looks cool and you don't really know why. That's fine too. Like if you just like the look of barefoot shoes, which I do now. The shoes, conventional shoes, just look weird, and I catch myself sometimes looking in the mirror with my Vibers. I'm like, oh, they're pretty cool. Yeah. I can almost guarantee no one else is thinking that.
I'm thinking that, Jim. I am.
Yes. No one else in my gym. I cop some really funny looks at my, but now I kind of like those funny looks. I'm like, yeah, sort of it might be the tiniest seam that's planted for that person. If I'm wearing a TFC shirt, who knows, they might look it up or whatever. But yeah, I think you're right. It has to be on this basis of education, and that's why TFC is so focused on trying to get a lot of free education out there to make it as accessible as possible. Because sometimes the simplest concept, like, yes, you actually can and should train your feet. Your shoes should be foot shaped. Sometimes these really simple, broad concepts can put someone on a path that they otherwise just wouldn't have explored.
Definitely.
So switching gears a little bit, I know you've been exploring the Soulmate a lot ever since, your first session on the Soulmate in San Fran, in our first meeting. You've been doing some cool stuff on there with weights. I know recently you've sort of started exploring the Soul Steps from David Weck and rope flow and so on. And that's another thing that TFC is quite big on, is using tools to facilitate behaviors or movements or certain aspects of function. So what's been your experience with those tools in general? And yeah, I'm just interested. Yeah, what's been your experience with those tools, and and maybe how have you incorporated that with clients?
Yeah. So, I'm really big on versatility of tools, because I know from my own experience, but also having many, many clients, people don't want a bunch of stuff, right? Yeah. Or maybe they do, but they never use it. So when it comes to the Soulmate, one of the things that I absolutely love about it is how versatile it is and accessible. And I feel like a lot of people get wrapped up, they'll see, you or me or others do like crazy things, or what they would perceive as like, oh my gosh, I could never do that. I don't have the balance. I don't have the strength, etc. But you can literally just put the Soulmate down and stand on it. Like you can hang on to a counter or a wall and stand on it. It is that accessible. And I love that about it, because I have been able to use it in a way where I'm getting people on it that would never even think like I have the balance to do this, and then to watch them progress, and then to watch them build the confidence in themselves of like, oh, one, I can like do something I never thought I'd be able to do. Two, my body is far more capable than I have given it credit for. And that, opens up this whole new world a lot of the times for these people in terms of their capabilities. So I love the Soulmate for that aspect. I also love its versatility in its uses, because I use it when I'm, working on my computer. I'll like set it up, standing on it. I'll like use it to massage my feet, to stretch my toes, to stretch my ankles. In addition to all of the balance work that, that's more so what people see it as, right? A balanced tool,
Wow.
which it is. But there's just so much that can be done with it. To the point where, I've used so many tools. I have so many tools. And I'm consistently coming back to, okay, I've done your assessment. I see the issues. I have an idea of where we need to go, what we need to do. All you need to get is the soulmate. You get it all you need to get is that soulmate kit. You need the toe spacers, you need the bands, you need the soulmate. And so the versatility is huge with it, and the accessibility. In terms of the soul sets, I've just recently been incorporating those, and it's so funny because when I first got them, I was like, what the heck do I do with these? It's like, okay, I get it, right? Like, I understand you set them how they're, like as their feet, and it puts my feet in supination, right? The angle, it kind of prevents the pronation or over excessive pronation from happening. Okay. I see the advertisements and I'm like, I am missing something, right? So I did some exploring. I was fortunate enough to meet with Dave Leck, and I had like a little session on them. And as soon as he started explaining them, everything clicked. And I was like, oh my gosh, these are so underutilized, misunderstood. And, as they're advertised in a certain way of like, you set them like this, you can stand while you're doing, your work or squatting or whatever, which is cool. They are meant for that. They are beneficial for that. But what I found even more beneficial was playing with the different positions and angles of the slow step. And specifically for me, because of that broken foot, I have since had the tendency to veer away from that bone, right? I broke my 5th metatarsal on my left foot. So I had the tendency for my left foot to collapse, my right foot to get real rigid and stuck in supination, avoiding the big toe. And so even to this day, I'm still working on those movement patterns, with as much progress as I've made a lot, but I'm still working on it, And so incorporating the soul steps and getting my feet into those positions. So like specifically my left foot, I don't know if you know the language around it. I don't know all of it, but downhill and inverted for my left foot, it puts everything in alignment in a way where like my glutes fire immediately. Whereas like without it, I have to kind of work to find the angle, right? And then same thing with my right foot, right? And the whole point of me saying that is that my feet act differently, and soul steps allow you to adjust them so that you're not on flat ground, right? So on my right foot, I train more of that everted position, because my right foot was the foot that had the tendency to kind of lock up and get stuck there. And so incorporating that and just exploring movements, like I get tools like that, and I just go into the gym and I explore and experiment and have fun. And doing all of that, incorporating full body movements, like maybe a row to a lunge or whatever, and feeling what that does in my body has been huge. And it's also been what's guided me to become such a great trainer in training others, because I understand how some things feel or how they could feel, right? So yeah, and the soul sets, I mean, they're not as versatile as like the soulmate, because they have a very specific goal that they're trying to accomplish, right? But I do think it's super beneficial for a lot of people that have really, really stubborn feet. As I'm sure you have come across them. I have as well, where it's like, we do all the work, we do all the required stuff. They're diligent, they're on it, and it's like, man, like it's just not creating the response it normally does, And so I think the soul sets are a really great tool in those situations, because oftentimes it's not the feet in isolation, right? It's like it's the full body function. And so to be able to incorporate that into training from that foot perspective, right? Of like, oh, you had a really hard time controlling pronation. Like I've seen people that just cannot get out of pronation. And so to put them on something like a soul step, I think is really beneficial because then they're going to start feeling up the chain, their hamstrings, their glutes, their quads, even their core in ways that they wouldn't without it. And yeah, and even beyond that, right? Like I'm really big on we use the tools for, what they're for, but they're on a crutch. And so what has been really cool in using the soul steps is I'll incorporate them and then I'll take them away and I'll do the same movement without it. And it's like, oh, my brain had like those neural pathways are just firing so much better. So even without it, right, you start to integrate better function.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the power of tools is that it sometimes can take away this need to coach. Like maybe you could spend all this time on flat ground trying to really find this position for someone and they're really struggling and it's a bit of a hard slog. Whereas if you can just put them on something like a soul step that puts them in the position or encourages that position without them having to think or consciously do it, then their nervous system can get a chance to experience that and feel it and understand how everything else activates in that position. And then it's like, oh, you do a few sessions, you try a few different variations, and then once you go back onto flat ground, the nervous system has already had that experience and can start to recreate that on flat ground. And, it's I think tools and this sort of task-based or play-based training helps to create constraints around movement. And so if your goal is to stand on a soulmate, then in a certain position, then everything else upstream has to accommodate that and stabilize so that you can be on that soulmate. And like we just mentioned with the soul steps, being in a certain position will have different effects upstream. If you're doing stuff with the rope, which I know you've been getting into recently, and I've been loving the rope flow practice, the rope is actually giving you feedback about the way you're moving. And if you're not moving well, then the rope won't swing well. And sometimes you get a bit of a smack. And so that, what I think a lot of people see these kinds of tools and go, oh, that's a gimmick, or that's, why would I use that, etc. And maybe you could make your own versions of certain products, definitely. And so it's, some people are a bit sus on businesses selling these tools. But the fact remains that tools are very powerful because they create an environment or they create a constraint that just encourages a certain pattern of movement. And then that pattern of movement or that capacity of movement can be carried over into all other aspects of what you do. So, for example, with the soul mate, then if you are only on flat ground, you're never going to get that deep pressure into your feet, and you're not going to get deep pressure into your forefoot, and you're not going to learn how to stabilize on something that is narrower than flat ground. It's really that simple. If all you do is training on flat ground, which you can do heaps of great training on flat ground, and I definitely don't do all my training on the soulmate, but if you never get on something that is domed and narrower than your foot or just narrower than flat ground, then you won't learn how to stabilize in that environment. And so then when it comes to balancing on a root or a rock or a log, when you're out in nature, it's like, whoa, what's happened there? And it is amazing how many people come to us, say they've done heaps of Pilates, heaps of yoga, and they've done heaps of balance. Then they get on a soulmate and suddenly all bets are off and suddenly they can't stabilize on one leg. And so it's not to say that the soulmate is the only way you should train your balance or whatever. It's just, you should be able to stabilize on that. You should be able to train on a soul step. You should be able to, adapt to these different environments, because at the end of the day, that's what the human body is supposed to do, is be adaptable. And I think people just get a bit stuck in one mode of training. And if they see these tools as a gimmick, then they miss out on the opportunity to, often it's about supplementing what we're missing from nature. And yes, you could go out and just hop along a creek, which I love to do, but realistically, I'm not going to be out there doing that every day. Most people definitely aren't going to be doing that. And most people's feet aren't ready for that. So if you have an an on-ramp towards building that ability, and it takes a tool, then it's makes sense to us.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I want to touch on something because, I mean, essentially what you're saying and all of that really touches on variability, right? Getting more variability. Like, you should be able to train walk on flat ground. You should be able to train and balance on a soulmate. You should be able to train and walk on rocks, on roots, on dirt, on grass, on sand, on all these things, right? And it really comes back to, are your feet able to morph and adapt to the environment, right? And it's interesting because on the soul steps, kind of hopping around here, but I want to say this before I lose it. On the soul steps, as I was going through that session with David Weck, he was putting them in different positions, and I immediately knew where my body was then meant to go. And that was when the light bulb went off. And what I realized is that in my own training with myself and with my clients, I had, I don't know, unconsciously, I don't know, but incorporated movements that put the feet and ankles in very different positions. And a lot of this just comes back to like functional training in different planes, mixing in a variety of lunges, squats, hinges, all these things, right? Because everybody, for the most part, knows what a squat and a lunge is. So not everybody knows what a hinge is, but there's so many variations within that. And so as I was on the soul steps, he would put it in a certain way, and I would put my foot on it, and I immediately knew, oh, I'm meant to rotate into this foot. And what I realized is that I was attempting to do this, like put the foot and the ankle in a certain position and then get the body to respond with certain movements with clients. And what the soul steps do is they put the foot in the position so that you can now access that movement pattern, even if you are not necessarily able to do it on flat ground. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, it does. And the variability piece there, I think, is really key, because often if people have restrictions or they've got ingrained patterns of movement and they only move on flat ground, then their body will just keep going along that ingrained pattern of movement. And that's often where you get pain and injury, because that area, a certain area or a certain, line will be overloaded. Whereas if you can then put them in an environment that doesn't allow them to go into their usual pattern, and then they experience this new pattern, then it's like, oh, that's possible, or that's what that feels like. Which you probably, they may never achieve that if they don't have that experience. And obviously David's done an amazing job of creating this specific tool that allows you to experience that. And yes, you can do it. You can probably do a lot of that just by incorporating different movements and coaching different positions and so on. But it's just that a tool can make that so much easier. Just makes that whole process more smooth, more efficient, which everyone wants.
More accessible, right?
More accessible. Yep.
More accessible to folks that probably wouldn't be able to do it without it.
Yeah.
At least to start.
At least to start. Yeah. Easier, more accessible, and that's what we're all about. Just trying to make this journey more and more accessible to more and more people, and provide that education. And it's awesome to. We're gonna have to wrap up now, but it's been really good to hear your whole journey with that. And I feel like we could probably talk. Well, I know we can talk for hours.
Yeah.
So I think we'll have to do a follow up podcast, hopefully when we're in person next. Again, potentially
that'd be awesome.
Which would be great. And we can get deeper and deeper, and I'm sure we'll have months of experience. As of this recording, it's November. This podcast will be released more like early 2025, but even then we'll have months of more experience on a bunch of different tools. So it'll be cool to explore it all. So thanks for your time, Heidi. And before we wrap up, maybe just tell everyone where people can find you if they want to connect with you, if they want to see your content. By the way, quick plug, Heidi's content is awesome, so highly recommend following her on Instagram if you're Instagram, TikTok as well.
I'm primarily on Instagram, and you can find me at that barefoot coach. And not on TikTok, but I am on YouTube. That barefoot coach is also my handle. I do have a website. It's been under construction for a very long time, but I also have a store now, which is awesome. So you'll find my website at barefootcoach.com. The store, which hopefully by the time everyone hears this, will have access to purchase a ton of things, including a soulmate. Is store.thatbarefootcoach.com. So you can find me in all those places.
nice and simple. That Barefoot Coach.
Yeah.
And we can chuck that in the show notes as well to make it easy for people. Thanks, Heidi. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for joining us on the Restore to Explore podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, the best way you can support us is by leaving a review and subscribing wherever you are catching this episode. If you want more free TFC training and education, are after some of our training tools, some natural footwear discounts, or want more specialised guidance from a trusted TFC health professional, then thefootcollective.com is the place to go. You'll find all of the helpful links in the show notes.